Hello everybody and welcome to another amazing video of DIY investing. Bitcoin has continued to sell off and we are seeing Bitcoin testing 25K, again waiting to determine whether or not this is going to hold. If this doesn't hold, we're about to see a very big sell-off that's most likely going to be taking us back down to the 618 Fibonacci, and it's also going to be finishing our first major Elliott wave impulse of this cycle. Although there is the potential of more downside, we still have the opportunity of holding 25K and actually getting a reversal off this level. For today's video, I'm going to be breaking down both scenarios that I see fit, talking about the bullish approach and the bearish approach so that we can ultimately capitalize on any direction that the market takes over the next couple months. Thank you guys so much for tuning in, and with that being said, let's jump right into this amazing video today. Alrighty guys, here we are to start off today's video. Now, I figured today would be a great opportunity if we actually talked about the Elliott wave impulse that we're seeing, talking a little bit about the bullish and bearish perspectives and how it can kind of factor into what we're seeing right now on the charts. Now, the first thing I wanted to kind of talk to you guys about is more or less just going to be Elliott wave cycles being an impulse and a corrective wave. And then we're going to be talking about the current correction that I think that we're actually in today. So when we're looking down here at Bitcoin, we can see that we have actually completed our first set of impulse waves. We had wave 1, we had wave 3 and wave 4, and then we saw a wave 5 impulse all the way up to about $31,000. Now after this move, we did end up seeing this smaller ABC correction back down to the 382. And that was something we talked a little bit about of maybe could actually be this ABC correction, because after every single impulse, we will always see an ABC correction or a corrective move of some kind. The average correction that we're going to see inside of a market is just your classic ABC, right? And this is what's going to happen after 5 impulse waves. So we can see that every single Elliott wave cycle, we have 5 impulse waves. Wave 1, wave 2, wave 3, wave 4, and then wave 5. Once that is completed, we go through a period of correction. Usually that correction takes us back down to about the 618 Fibonacci. And so we've been watching this, waiting to determine, what is our Elliott wave count? Are we currently sitting at more of an ABC and this already was a 1 wave? Or because we saw this most recent breakout, are we in something a little bit different? And this is what I think is important that we're talking about, because what we were looking at before was that this was an ABC and we were about to start the next leg up. But the problem with this came in the fact that we were unable to hold support here and we broke down and fully retraced that move. So when that happened, I told you guys that most likely what we're looking at is a bigger picture ABC correction, and we're actually working on wave C right now. And if you're not familiar with Elliott wave theory, basically what happens whenever a wave A comes down and then the wave B actually breaks above the top of the impulse, right? So look over here in this first impulse. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, but then the A and then the B wave is actually a lower high, right? This is a lower high, and then we see a lower low. That's the general thing that you're going to see inside of a Elliott wave correction. Now, inside of an expanded flat, we see something different. We have the top of the impulse here. We correct back down inside of wave A, and then wave B actually breaks out and makes a new high back above the top of the impulse, right? And so it's kind of a fake out pattern. Most people are expecting that we're going to be going back up into a new impulse, and then that's right before we end up getting a lower low, and we actually go below the lowest point of wave A, right? And then now we go in for a completely new sell-off. And so what we're looking at today is that same sort of potential where we finished our first impulse. We can see 5 impulse waves from the lows. After that, we saw our first A wave decline, and then that took us to the 382. We saw a B wave, and then that B wave took us just barely outside and past the top of our impulse in the exact same way that that happened over here in the expanded flat. Now, the good thing about this pattern is the fact that it is a continuation pattern. So even though this is a correction and it does show that we are going to be actually making a lower low here, it is still a bullish continuation pattern. So we finished wave 1, wave 3, and wave 5. We have to finish some type of correction on the way back down before we can start that next leg up. Because the great thing about Elliott wave cycles is just because we got our first impulse here, it doesn't mean that the big picture is over. In fact, this is just the beginning of our cycle. When we're looking at Elliott waves, we have to remember a couple different things. Now, inside of an Elliott wave cycle, what we're generally going to see is a correction back down to the 618 Fibonacci. And that's your golden pocket for support inside of an Elliott wave impulse. And so generally speaking, when we actually start the corrective phase, you're going to bottom at the 618, and then it'll kind of start that next leg up. And so if we're going to follow the average rule of Elliott wave theory, we would expect a correction back down to the 618 being about $21.5 thousand. And then once that is actually finished, we might go through a period of consolidation here, but regardless, we would be expecting to start that next impulse. And all we're going to be doing now is just getting the very first stages of our uptrend, right? We have only ever completed one impulse, or at least that's what we're looking at. Because we've retraced this move already, I don't believe that this is an impulse here. I do believe that this is a corrective A, B, and C. And so we need to see a lower low here back down to the 618 before this first cycle can be over. But the amazing thing about Elliott waves is the fact that once this correction is over, once we see this final sell-off, we got to remember that Elliott waves behave in 3 sets of 3. So we have wave 1, wave 3, and then wave 5. So that's our first set of 3 impulse waves. That, in and of itself, is just the first impulse, right? It's the first leg up. So on the big picture, what we're going to be looking at here, we're going to be looking at this as a wave 1. Wave 2 is this correction that we're in right now. Whenever we hit back down here at the 618, most likely that will be around the completion point of that wave 2. And then what starts after that is actually the wave 3 impulse. And so what I've kind of been watching for here for Bitcoin was, if we were going to hold above 25K, I expected that this was going to be kind of like our blow off top as we ran up to our first lower high, being about $40,000 to $50,000. Now, because we've already fully retraced that impulse, I'm actually leaning towards this being a deeper correction, and we're most likely not going to be seeing that same type of a move. But it doesn't change the big picture, because in the big picture, what we're going to actually end up seeing once this wave 2 is completed is the next leg up in this cycle. And so in the same way that we saw 3 impulse waves here, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 inside of this wave 1. Let's make them small so that you guys can see that they're subwaves here. In the same way that we saw 3 impulse waves inside of this first impulse, we'll start another one of the same things, right? Where I don't know where the exact low is, probably sometime at the end of the year would be my guess. But then we would start a brand new set of impulse waves, right? Wave 1, wave 3, and then wave 5. And we would just do another one of these impulses. And so this is why I think Elliott waves are so valuable, is just because of the fact we see Bitcoin follow them. Bitcoin's an impulsive market. Bitcoin is a very emotional market. So because of that, we see emotions played out through Elliott wave theory. Now, it's kind of a lot of the same as what we saw inside of our last cycle. The only difference is, this impulse has been shorter than the one that we saw in that last cycle. But we saw, once again, clear Elliott waves, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 up. We saw an ABC correction back down. And then we got, once again, our next 3 set of impulse waves. And so the thing I want you guys to remember here is the fact that these impulses are going to get very big. And so remember, if 2019, this first leg up was just our 1 wave, right? And then wave 3 took us from 3.2 or 3.8 thousand all the way up to 65,000. And then our wave 5 barely took us into a new all-time high, right? And so this is the way that these impulses are going to work. We can always see 3 sets of 3 in every single one of the impulses. Wave 1 is what starts the hype. Wave 3 is generally the most hyped, where the most money and the most volume comes into it. That's what we saw inside of this last cycle here. And then wave 5 is generally, well, in crypto it can vary. In our last cycle, wave 5 was a lot of profit taking. In our wave 5 of 2017, it was actually an in our wave 5 in 2017, it was actually an extended wave 5, right? So wave 5s can be unpredictable. Wave 5s can actually be overextended. Sometimes they can be a little bit lackluster, like what we saw here. They're not the most predictable Elliott wave. They're the profit-taking Elliott wave. So if there's a lot of hype, then the Elliott wave impulse of wave 5 can actually overextend, like what we saw here going from 3,000 to 20,000 in that one leg up. Or there can actually be a heavy profit taking, and that's kind of what we saw here, where we barely even made a new all-time high above the top of wave 4. So when we're looking at where we're at today, even if we see a deeper correction that takes us back down to the 618, all we're doing is just creating the very first stages of our impulses and the foundation of our bull trend, right? So whenever this is completed, we'll start that wave 3. And I don't know exactly what this cycle is going to look like big picture, because what we looked at in our last cycle, wave 1 took us all the way up to the 618, and then wave 3 took us massively into new all-time highs. So if we're watching Bitcoin today, and Bitcoin makes this first wave 1 and we correct back down and finish that wave 2, and we're getting ready for wave 3, do I think that we're going to go straight into new all-time highs? No, I don't. And the reason why is because you guys got to remember the time, right? So the time from the low of the bear market all the way to the peak low of wave 2 was 450 days. So from the bottom and the beginning of the impulse to the ending of wave 2, this was just how long wave 1 took. It took 457 days from the beginning of wave 1 to the end of wave 2. And so that is how long it took before we were even at a point of reconsolidation and running into new all-time highs. From where we're at today, from the very peak low of our cycle, 450 days is going to be taking us clear over in February of next year. So we got to remember here, guys, that I'm not anticipating that we're just going to instantly teleport to new all-time highs, because so far this cycle is a little bit different based off time, right? Bitcoin has not even had near the same length of consolidation at this low that we saw in the last cycle. And we got to remember that every cycle up to this point over the last 10 years, it's taken over 1,000 days from the all-time high of the cycle to the point of us breaking the all-time high of the cycle again. And if this impulse took 450 days just in the very first one, we got to remember that this is a long-term game here. And we still have, clear into next year before we're sitting at the same threshold where Bitcoin completed its first impulse in the last cycle. So we got to remember that even after it completed that, we still had quite a few months of this before it made that big run into new all-time highs. And if you draw this all the way over to here, you're looking at closer to 700 days from the bottom of the bear market to the point of us actually making the run to new all-time highs. And it was over 1,000 before we actually ended up breaking those all-time highs from the prior ones. So when we're looking at this, we have a lot of factors at play. And I believe that once this wave 2 is completed, we'll start the next impulse. And I think that this one's going to be a little bit more consistent with what we saw in 2017. And if you guys don't remember the wave count in 2017, I'll share with you guys. In 2017, we saw 5 impulse waves that took us just barely below that all-time high. But in our first impulse, we went from the range lows all the way to the range highs, right? In our last cycle, we didn't quite do that. We made our first impulse, but it didn't go into new all-time highs. It was close, but we went through all of this consolidation, right? Our wave 1 was just us kind of making that first little impulse, and we only really went to that 618 fib, right? And that was where we peaked here. And then we went through all of this lengthy consolidation after we ended up topping. 2017 was very unique, where we saw quick impulses, little corrections, quick impulse, little corrections, and we ended up making a completed wave, and we ended up completing our first cycle running all the way back up to those prior highs. Now, after that was done, we ended up starting wave 3. We saw wave 1, wave 3 of 3, and then wave 5 of 3. And then that was where we ended up going into new all-time highs. Wave 3 of 2017 was the breakout into new all-time highs, right? We have wave 1, wave 2, wave 3, wave 4, and then wave 5 was our extended wave 5 right here. It was an extended 5th. So 2017 was unique. We didn't quite see anything like that in our last cycle. Everything was very different all the way through. But when we're looking at our current cycle today, already our impulse is a little bit different. Already it's looking to be that it's not going to follow exactly the same. Kind of how we had this quick impulse, a really big one, and then we went through all of this length of consolidation after. Bitcoin is making, a little bit of a different setup right here. And I think that once we finish wave 2, instead of us going straight into new all-time highs, we'll most likely make our wave 3 impulse that finally gets us back up to this lower high being 50K. We can see this little 4-wave correction back down. But then I think that overall, our first impulse for this cycle is just going to be taking us back to those all-time highs in a very similar way that it did over here in 2016 and 2017. The first impulse went from the range lows all the way to the all-time highs, and then wave 3 was where we saw the breakout. I think that with what we're seeing with Bitcoin today, we're leaning to actually be trending in that same sort of direction. So wave 1, wave 3, and then wave 5 will be taking us back to those range highs up here. And then from there, I would actually anticipate wave 3 and wave 5 actually being the move into price discovery. So I wanted to share this with you guys because ultimately I see that the cycle's a little bit different. We are seeing this sell-off in the shorter time frames, and it's important that we talked a little bit about what we're seeing. You know, at the end of the day, we're still on 25K support, but it's looking pretty weak and not like it wants to really hold here. Anything is possible for a fake out. You know, we could see a bear trap and do something like this, but we would have to instantly reclaim that for me to even switch bias. As of now, I'm looking at this as a bigger picture ABC correction, most likely taking us back down to $21,500, and so that's kind of what I'm going to be leaning to. Overall, it doesn't change the big picture. We're still just making the beginning impulses in the foundation of our bull market, so I'm going to continue to update you guys as we follow through. Anyways, if you found value in this, leave a like, comment, and subscribe. Hit the notification bell so you don't miss out on any of these videos. If you guys want to join the Discord server, see what I'm doing with my portfolio, how I'm investing in these markets, links are in the description to go ahead and sign up. Thank you guys so much for the support, and with that being said, I will catch you in the next one. As always, peace out.